Welcome to meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. And as usual, please make sure that when you're not speaking, your mic is on mute. When you are speaking, that you speak slowly and clearly and address your comments through the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our guests today. Our witnesses are from the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, Lieutenant Colonel.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Sidhu.
Madam Chair, as we discussed, can we take a moment to discuss the notice of meeting that was called yesterday? Because something can be dealt with today after we are done the witnesses. There's a lot of work with our residents expect from us during constituency weeks, and we all prefer not to lose time.
Absolutely. Just let me clarify for the committee the reason for calling the committee business. In the motion for this study, there were specific witnesses that were listed, and we were to have 4 consecutive meetings. But some of the witnesses are not available to appear before April 16th. And so we don't have any direction then as to what to do because the additional witnesses we talked about aren't due until Friday. So I need direction from the committee in terms of, do we want to skip on the consecutive meetings? Do we want to up the deadline for submission of the additional witnesses and start putting those panels together? Let me just go in order here. I think the next person on the list is Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to talk also about the same thing which Ms. Sidhu has raised, that yesterday we received a notice of meeting without any consultation with the committee members and in a constituency week. I think as members of parliament, we owe our responsibility to our constituents, and cutting time out of that will not be advisable. We had list of witnesses which were not added in the motion the other day, and we can always provide the list of witnesses. The list of witnesses, I think, should always be there. That's why if some witnesses are not available, we can go down the list. So I think it is really very, like, we can submit you the list of the witnesses anytime you want, and holding a meeting in the constituency week doesn't make sense because it's cutting time out of the our constituents are in a situation because of this pandemic. They have lots of needs. And as a member of parliament, it is my responsibility. I have a lot of meetings already planned with my constituents, telephone calls, Zoom calls, and also with the stakeholders. They are looking towards us for many answers, and I think we should fulfill that commitment. So we should look into this issue of not holding a meeting during the constituency week.
Yes, and just for your information, I think the clerk has already received some of the witnesses, that the additional witnesses that the Liberals would like to get, but that we haven't received any from any of the other parties, and usually they try to ratio it to the membership of the committee. Ms. Alislev. You're on mute.
I am. There we go. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to stress that we want to get on with the witnesses today because we only have 2 very important witnesses for this 1-hour panel, and that should be our focus and priority. Many of us are not available at 1 p.m. today, so that would not be the right time to discuss this. I'm wondering if we could have a meeting to discuss our planning agenda or whatever in the break week, and then that we could deal with all of that then, so that we know who we want to call, in what order on this important study, and have an actual meeting dedicated to really planning on such an important topic. Thank you.
Yes, and just to let the committee know, the reason I put 2 hours of meeting on the Tuesday is that in addition to this study, there is actually a number of other things to consider. We received letters from previous witnesses that we need to discuss. We have the unpaid work study that we identified a whole bunch of other witnesses, but we didn't say how many meetings we want to have or what we want to do with those. And the same is true on the rural study. And so that's why there's a lot of things to talk about.
Madam Chair, let's not delay the witnesses' time. I'll bring at the end of the meeting. We'll discuss then. Let's
Very
start
good.
the meeting.
Thank you very much. Let's go then to our witnesses. I was in the process of welcoming you, so I'm going to welcome you again from the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, Lieutenant Colonel Eric LeBlanc, who is the commander, and as well, yes, Madame LaRouche.
Oui, excusez-moi, le son est extrêmement, j'entends comme en...
I apologize. I'm hearing the translation is an echo. There's a problem with the sound. I don't know if it's just me.
To check into this. Very good. The clerk will check. Is it better? Can you hear me loudly, or is it not good?
C'est mieux, mais ça fait la même chose. Ça fait quelques reprises dans le comité que comme
It's the same. It's better, but there's a problem. It's like I hear an echo.
Some difficulties last time, and is it getting better? I don't know if the clerk can identify whether the problem is at this end or perhaps on your computer end. Which one?
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Alexander Roger. I'm helping Stephanie Bond for the committee. Ms. Gladieux, I'm very sorry to interrupt the meeting.
No problem.
Madame Larouche, on me dit de débrancher votre...
I'm told that you should unplug your headset and then plug it back in because that would seem that the problem is coming from your end. So let's try this.
Parce que pour moi, Madame la Présidente.
On my end, the French translation is coming in fine. I have no echo here. Okay, I've just unplugged and replugged, so I think it's okay. Sorry, I apologize then. Excellent. Go ahead then. We'll go back to the meeting.
Happy to welcome for the third time from the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, Lieutenant Colonel Eric LeBlanc, who's the commander, and from National Defence and Canadian Forces Ombudsman, Gregory Lick, who is the Ombudsman, and also Robin Hines, the Director General of Operations. And you will have each one 5 minutes to address the committee, and then we'll go into our rounds of questions. And so Eric, will begin with you for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Eric LeBlanc, Commanding Officer of the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, also known as the CFNIS. The CFNIS, like other military police units, is an independent investigative unit that falls under the command of the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. The CFNIS provides an investigative capability for the purpose of supporting the fair and impartial administration of military justice. Our independence, as laid out in the National Defence Act, enables the conduct of thorough investigations without outside influence. The primary mandate of the CFNIS is to investigate serious and sensitive criminal and service offences in relation to Department of National Defence property, D&D employees, and CAF personnel serving in Canada and around the world. We are similar to a civilian police force's major crimes unit. Like all credentialed military police members, the CFNIS has jurisdiction to investigate offences committed on or in relation to defence establishments, as well as offences committed by those subject to the Code of Service Discipline, regardless of their rank or status. This jurisdiction exists throughout Canada and the world. The safety and security of the defence community is our top priority. Every allegation or complaint that we receive is reviewed to determine if it meets the CFNIS benchmarks for investigations, and if so, an investigation is launched. Each case assigned to the CFNIS is unique, but in all cases, investigations are conducted to determine the facts, analyze the evidence, and where appropriate, lay charges. CFNIS investigators are professional police officers. They receive contemporary police training in areas similar to those as their civilian partners, often working in consultation or coordination with civilian police, and are, by experience and circumstance, well informed of both military culture and environment. As recently as this month, the CFNIS participated in a large OPP-led operation called Project Weaver, helping dismantle criminal networks in Southern Ontario. In addition to being deployed with CAF operations around the world, CFNIS investigators operated out of 6 permanent detachments across Canada, with each detachment having, amongst other capabilities, a sexual offense response team known as SORT. SORT teams were stood up as a direct result of the recommendations brought forth in the Madame Deschamps report from 2015. The SORT increases the ability of the CFNIS to protect and support victims of sexually based offenses by identifying, investigating, and helping prosecute persons responsible for criminal sexual offenses. They and all CFNIS members have specialized training in sexual assault investigations, including training on employing a trauma-informed approach. The CFNIS also operates their own victim services program, which acts as a referral service between victims, survivors, and various support resources they may need. While CFNIS investigations at a minimum collect all reasonably available evidence bearing on the guilt or innocence of any person who is subject of the investigation, victim considerations are always at the forefront. At all times, CFNIS investigators remain under my command, regardless of where they are employed, within Canada or abroad. As their commanding officer, I'm well aware that CFNIS investigators take pride in ensuring their investigative responsibilities are conducted in a professional manner and that they, at all times, recognize the importance of their work. I would like to thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak with you all today, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Excellent. And now then we'll go on to, I'm not sure which one of you will speak, whether it's Robin or Gregory, but you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. C'est la première fois que je prends la parole devant.
This is the first time that I'm speaking to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. The issue of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces is not a new one, but it is something that has recently come to the public's attention and has been subject to study in this committee as well as in the Standing Committee of National Defense. I believe that we all agree that we have to find collectively a way to stamp out this problem and ensure that members can trust that their complaints and their concerns will be dealt with in earnest.
In recent weeks regarding the role of my office in addressing complaints of sexual misconduct within the military. I would like to provide clarity on this matter today. First, my office does not have authority to investigate criminal offenses of sexual assault. Neither does it have authority to investigate sexual misconduct matters that would result in charges under the Code of Service Discipline. Second, I must stress that my office cannot and will not investigate matters without the consent of the complainant, no matter what the nature of the complaint. In my predecessor's testimony before the Standing Committee on National Defense, we heard that the complainant did not wish to be identified and did not wish to pursue an investigation, but hoped that the information could be brought to the attention of someone who could affect change. Third, the current reporting structure of the Ombudsman is directly to the Minister of National Defense, not to the Privy Council office or any other body. This is a critical point that needs to be made in order to correct the record. Had I been faced with the same facts, I would have done exactly as my predecessor did. I would have reported the facts within my direct reporting structure. There was no other body to which the matter could have been referred, and particularly important, given what we know of the members' wishes. Regardless of the solutions proposed to address culture change or to ensure that survivors come forward, I would hope that they take into account several important points. In specific cases of sexual misconduct, it is crucial that victims have control over how and when their complaint moves forward. Victims must be empowered to make their own choices about what steps to take next. As Justice Marie Deschamps said in her 2015 report, the victim should not have to bear the burden of the complaint process. Victims of sexual misconduct must not fear reprisal or possible career consequences for making their complaints. This is not a new problem, nor is it limited solely to sexual misconduct. It applies to all forms of misconduct and unfairness in the armed forces. Victims are less likely to feel safe coming forward without the assurance that their complaints will be dealt with by a mechanism that is free of outside interference or control. This is why there needs to be a mechanism external to the chain of command and any other vested interest, political or administrative. Mon bureau a été créé il y a plus de 20 ans.
My office was established more than 20 years ago, and it is outside of the chain of command. But it has administrative ties to the department. and we report to a minister of the party in power. We have been making the argument for full independence since our creation, but there has been no political will to act. The issue of sexual misconduct is an unfortunate illustration of how constituents fall between the cracks of a closed system with no fully independent recourse mechanisms. We have heard bits and pieces of information in the media and in testimony before committees that consideration is being given to creating a new and independent mechanism to address matters of this type. There have been no details about what this will look like. For the record, my office has not been consulted. Whatever approach is taken, the body that addresses this issue must have full administrative independence, must be external to the chain of command, have a legislated mandate, and direct reporting relationship with Parliament. Anything short of this will not provide victims with the assurances they need to come forward and have these matters dealt with.
Ms. Robin Hines and I stand ready to take questions from the committee, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Then we'll start with our first set of questions, and we're beginning with Ms. Alislav for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for this important testimony. I'd like to ask Lieutenant Colonel LeBlanc, can you let us know how and when you begin an investigation?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. In terms of receiving an investigation, there's a few different avenues that a report can be made to the CFNIS. I could receive a direct tasking from the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal, direct contact from a victim or a witness to an event. Also through units chains of command, we could receive a call from a unit.
And the chain of command could include the Chief of Defense Staff, could include the Minister of National Defense.
Anybody within the chain of command who has a report to make can make that report to us.
Thank you very much. And how do you know if an investigation has been tampered with? We heard in the news from the media that some investigations have been tampered with by those who perhaps are complicit or wanting to get a different outcome. How would you know if an investigation has been tampered with?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It's pretty, for us, everything is compartmentalized within an investigation. So what I mean by that is the actual process of investigating, it stays within the unit. So there are times when what I mean by unit is my unit, the CFNIS. Once we hit the point where we're ready to proceed with charges or not, if those charges happen to be through the military justice system, there may be some units involved of the subjects of the investigation. I, as well as everybody here, is aware of the reports on the media, and I can speak from experience.
Are you saying that they're false?
It would be inappropriate for me to contest somebody who's not here, but I can speak about my experience. So my experience has been when unit chains of command have heard of a victim coming forward, and they're asking us for information about the file in front of them, generally with the best intent of supporting the victim. My unit has the unique position where we need to balance the right for the victim to have privacy with the right of a chain of command to know. So generally speaking, if the victim of an investigation is not, the unit has not been made aware, it's really their choice to make that unit aware. So we typically don't provide any information.
But it is possible for an investigation to have been tampered with by people in the chain of command.
A chain of command can ask us questions, but we don't provide them information. So no.
We also understand from media reports that some critical testimony and evidence has been lost in sexual misconduct, assault, investigations resulting in charges not being laid or the investigation being stopped. Is that accurate?
So I've read the same media report that you're referring to. And while I don't want to speak to individual cases and where
I'm not asking for specifics. I'm asking if it has ever occurred.
Absolutely. And I think.
And do you keep track, a record of how many times that happens?
How many times an error has occurred in an investigation?
Mm-hmm. So, and critical evidence is lost, resulting in charges not being laid or whatever.
So we have records of, I guess, of complaints. So if there are complaints about a specific investigation or generally investigations, there's processes in place. So we have internally, there's a professional standards organization who is charged with reviewing investigations that are ongoing. There's also the Military Police Complaints Commission, which is a quasi-judicial body.
But those are complaints. I'm talking about the auditing and the loss of critical evidence and testimony. Do you keep a record of how many times that happens? Is there a report that identifies how many times critical evidence and testimony has been lost?
So we have no specific report like that. We have a quality assurance process whereby senior members of the unit are charged with reviewing ongoing and concluded investigations for any error or any opportunities to really develop and get better. But no, there's nothing specific, one place that would identify all of those things.
So it's possible that in some cases, the right outcome or the just outcome may have been compromised.
In terms of an outcome at a judicial process, it's really beyond just the CFNIS. It's also any other police service that played a role in the collecting of evidence, also the court's handling of its own evidence as well.
In 2015, the previous government asked the CFNIS to investigate the possible allegations against then General Vance for his time both in Gagetown, a rumor about some occurrence in Gagetown, and actual in Naples. Can you tell us that in both those instances, all the witnesses in those locations, officers who had been posted there at the time, were contacted as part of the investigation?
So again, because this is speaking about a specific investigation, there's laws in place that prevent.
Not looking for names, just looking to make sure that all of the witnesses potential were contacted as part of the investigation.
I'm sorry, that's your time. We're going now to the Liberals, I believe. Is it Sonia for 6 minutes?
Madam Chair, I will be starting. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to everyone, and thanks to both the witnesses for your important testimonies today. My first question is for Lieutenant Colonel LeBlanc. I would like to know the process. So can you please clarify the process that begins your unit's involvement in any investigation? So if you can provide some details on the process, that how you begin it, that would be great.
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, the overall process for coming in, I think I spoke to that. There's a few different avenues where folks can refer a complaint to us. So that could come from an individual who's affected, a victim, a witness. It could come from a unit or any member of the chain of command or anyone that calls us, quite frankly. I could get tasked directly from the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal as well. I guess a fifth avenue perhaps is if an investigator uncovers another crime as a part of an investigation, they may open up an investigation into that. Once receipt of a complaint occurs, then we need to validate the complaint. So validating the complaint means we need to make sure that what's coming in is criminal or a serious service offense, and it meets our benchmarks for investigation. So as a major crime unit, that means some lower level offenses might be handed over to another military police unit, or perhaps even a unit investigation where it doesn't meet the threshold for a CFNIS investigation.
Is there a process or protocol in place that would protect the integrity of a proper and thorough investigation, as well as all the members involved? Specifically, I would like to know, while the investigation is ongoing, how can you protect the people involved and ensure that they are not marginalized?
Absolutely. I can talk about a technicality of how we preserve. So we have our own policing database that's accessible to most police officers in the Canadian Armed Forces. However, internally as a major crimes unit, we protect that information from anybody accessing it through access control measures. So people have different categories of or levels of access to that information while it's ongoing. We're physically housed separate from any other military police unit. So our regional offices are in different buildings than other folks, which is controlled by us. So that's some of the ways that we protect the information. When we receive calls, there's certain points in time where information is given out. So we give out information to affected victims periodically as the investigation progresses. That doesn't mean step by step will be laid out, but it means that the overall progress and general sense as to where we're headed will be communicated. A subject's chain of command, typically towards the end, will be advised of the investigation. And at times, if there's operational impacts, then they may be apprised that there's an investigation. But they're limited to an information to knowing just that it's ongoing. We don't actually communicate the steps that we're investigating.
Thank you. And I will share my time with my colleague, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the witnesses. I'd like to specifically ask Mr. Lick questions. It's good to see you again. I know that we've previously had a meeting where we talked about, and you gave some very, very concrete suggestions about independence and the structure, and I very much appreciate you giving that advice and continuing those conversations. I would like to ask specifically about your role versus the sexual misconduct response centers, the SMRCs. My understanding is that that's been in place since 2017. Would you be the primary place that somebody would go if they needed support with regard to an allegation of sexual misconduct, or would you refer it to the SMRC?
So I think so we can receive a complaint of sexual misconduct. And that is the right of every member of the military or the department as well, civilians as well. But in this case, as I said before, we do not have the mandate or the authority to investigate or to take forward anything that is a criminal matter, such as sexual assault, or that's something or a sexual misconduct matter or situation that would fall under the Code of Service Discipline. But I would like to ask Robin, Ms. Hines, just to elaborate a bit more on the details of how we do handle a complaint that comes forward to us. Ms. Hines?
Yeah, I know that my time is limited, but if she or you could answer specifically, if something is criminal, though, you would refer that to the CFNIS or to the Provost Marshal. I would assume that since you don't have that investigative authority, or if somebody wanted support, counseling, wanted to know what avenues were open, you would refer to the SMRCs, I would imagine, since those are more specifically tailored to the kind of mandate.
So I certainly must stress, Ms. Vanderbilt, that my office cannot go to any external body without the consent of the complainant. That's the most important part, I think, in this whole discussion.
Yeah, and we've heard that as well. In terms of consent, though, if you knew
that
the PCO wanted, would you told the complainant that there was
Ms. Vandenbelt, I'm sorry, you're out of time. Monsieur Barcelot-Duval est le prochain pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is directed at Mr. Lick. We know that we had a leader of the Canadian Forces for 2 years, a chief of staff. during which time there were accusations of sexual assault against him, and your predecessor had tried to get in touch with the defense minister to alert them of the situation, but the latter did not want to take cognizance of the information and meet to discuss these facts. Because the minister claimed that the reason invoked for which he didn't want to know more about it and for which he didn't want to become aware of the situation is because this would have been interference in the army, and this would have been against the independence of the process. Is this your opinion? Do you agree with this?
So we have to remember in this particular situation, the wishes of the member in this case. So I report directly to the Minister of National Defense. My predecessor did as well, obviously. He brought the particular issue. It was still confidential to the minister, tried to have a conversation as we understand it. As I said, I would have done the same thing, knowing the circumstances and the wishes of the member at that time. So therefore,
Ma question particulière, en fait, c'est de savoir.
Actually, my question was, would this have been interference on the part of the minister to have met with your predecessor and to become familiar with the information?
I think in this particular case, I do not believe that it would be interference. My predecessor, as he has stated, was asking for advice in that regard. So I was not aware of the particular discussion that happened, other than what has been stated publicly. But in this case, he was asking for advice.
Merci. Et si le ministre...
Thank you. Had the minister decided to launch an investigation either about this specific issue or about the Chief of Staff in general, in your opinion, would this also have been interference? Would this have damaged the independence of the Army?
So in this particular situation, the member asked for confidentiality, as we understand it. The member, as we understand it, did not wish to go forward with an investigation, and also the member wanted to see what could be changed. That was the issue of the conversation that happened, as we understand publicly. So for this particular point, I don't believe that that person was not asking for an investigation to be started. They were really looking for what could change.
Je comprends, mais en même temps, on parle quand même du...
I understand, but we're all talking about the Chief of Staff. This is serious. When a Chief of Staff is alleged to have committed sexual misconduct, it seems to me that this is a serious matter and that more ought to be known or investigated or looked into, because all of the Canadian forces, in a way, can be called into question if the Chief of Staff is involved because of the rank. Beyond the individual's will, there's also a ministerial responsibility, is there not?
Absolutely, and certainly agree that it is a very serious matter and needs to be properly investigated. However, that was not, at the time of the allegations were brought forward, that was not the member's wishes.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Leblanc.
Thank you very much. Mr. Leblanc, if after a minister would have become aware of these situations, if the minister had turned to you to ask you to investigate, would this have been considered interference in internal Army affairs?
In terms of interference, as it applies to the CFNIS, if I understand correctly, in order to start or start an investigation, that like asking me to examine and look at would not be interference. Interference would be improper conduct during the investigation as it relates to the CFNIS.
Monsieur Leblanc, est-ce que en 2018 ou par le temps qui a suivi, est-ce qu'il y a eu un...
Mr. Leblanc, in 2018 or since, has there been any point at which the minister's office asked you to look into the matter, to get information, to see whether it would be relevant to do so? Either you or your predecessor. I don't know if you were the one who was in the position at this time.
I've been in this position since May of 2020. So as far as I'm aware, I have no information.
OK, donc vous savez pas si le bureau du ministre ou si le ministre lui-même...
So you don't know whether the minister or his office contacted your department to ask for the situation to be looked into. In other words, that you should go any further into the matter. No. I understand the Ombudsman does not have the power to come to you and report a problem to you. This is what I've understood, because you were not in his chain of command. Do you consider that this is a problem?
So as from my time or my experience within the CFNIS, and I can't speak for the Ombudsman, I can say in the past, investigators from their office have coordinated with our office when there was a desire for a criminal investigation. And that has happened in the past, but only when there was a desire.
And now we're going to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. So to you, Mr. Lick, the Ombudsman has no authority when it comes to criminal investigations. That's clear. And you've said that but you would have done the exact same thing as your predecessor did. Interestingly, when we had the minister before us, before the committee 2 days ago, I asked him, did you provide advice to your predecessor, saying he could have gone to the SMRC? And he said, oh, I did tell the ombudsperson to go to the SMRC. Now, the SMRC, though, as I understand it, that isn't the correct place for you to go, or because you did not have that authority to do so, that wouldn't have been the correct path for Mr. Walburn to take, just to be clear.
Yeah, let me clarify a bit on that regard. The member who brought the complaint forward would have been provided with the information of what recourse mechanisms were available to them, including what support would be available to them, including the SMRC. But the SMRC is not an investigative body. It does not investigate complaints. It is primarily there in this particular situation to provide support and information to members who suffer a particular sexual misconduct or sexual assault.
And you mentioned in your opening statement that there is no political will to make a change in terms of that reporting mechanism. So right now you can only report to the minister. Would it be helpful to you in that change to report to Parliament as a whole, as many other ombudspersons or commissioners have? Is that what you're looking for, or what exactly? Could you explain it and exactly what maybe would help in this situation? Yeah.
I think the primary issue in this particular issue of the day around sexual misconduct in the military is what will provide victims, survivors, witnesses even, the confidence and the comfort level to come forward with their allegations and have them addressed properly, without any political or administrative vested interest interfering in that. That is the most important question that I think the committees are dealing with today. And I think, in my very, very strong opinion now, the only way that we can provide that level of confidence and comfort level to victims and survivors and even witnesses to come forward is having an external body completely independent. Normally, in this case, it would be reporting directly to Parliament. That is what we owe these victims, we owe these survivors.
Okay. So one of the problems that came from the testimony from Mr. Welburn in Defense Committee was that once he had brought
the complaint forward and the minister refused to hear it, and they had that exchange. Meetings afterward, there were less and less, and many were canceled. So in your role, when you took over that role, could you say, you know, on average, or do you have regular meetings with the minister? Have you had the same issues, or has it been okay?
Certainly, I have not had the issues that my predecessor experienced. We have, the minister and I, to this point, have a very respectful and professional relationship. We meet probably between quarterly and semi-annually on various issues, particularly systemic investigations that we are carrying out. If there was an issue of more urgency that required me to meet with the minister, I would ask for that meeting and address it with him at that time.
Okay. And if this were to change, if this were to be reported to Parliament, how do you see that moving forward?
I would see that it would be very similar to other commissioners and other particular individuals that have this reporting to Parliament or an officer of Parliament arrangement. It is still in the manner of, as an investigation occurs or as a review occurs, depending on the mandate that organization has, you would come forward with recommendations to the department, usually through the minister, on what should occur. That is what I would expect would be very similar to what would happen if we created or developed an independent agency that would address complaints, sexual misconduct. It would not be one that has an order-making power. I think that would be inappropriate with respect to orders over the military. I think that would be inappropriate.
Okay. So one of the key issues here that, and I don't know how to get beyond it, and maybe I can't do it in 30 seconds, Madam Chair, but there is such an entrenched don't ask, don't tell, a knowledge that if you say anything against a superior officer or anyone else, that you will be blacklisted, that you will be thought of as a snitch. How do you, and maybe you can address this in other questions, maybe we can get back to it when I have more time, but how do we start, and this can be for both witnesses, but how do we start to really get at that trust level? Is it through
and you're
education?
out of time.
Yeah.
So now we're going into our second round of questions, and we'll go to Ms. Wong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to first of all thank all the witnesses who appear before us today for this very, very important study. Now, I'd like to continue asking the question, which Ms. Alice started. And in 2015, when the previous government requested you, I'm addressing to Lieutenant LeBlanc, and to requested you to investigate allegations pertaining to General Vance and the relationship he had during his time in Naples. Did the investigation interview all of the officers who were posted there at that time? I don't think you have time to reply last time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess my response would be the same. So to speak about specifics of an investigation is not appropriate. And I wouldn't get into the what we did or didn't do throughout the investigation. I will tell you that a complaint was received and an investigative assessment was conducted and a report was distributed from it.
So that means that you will not be able to, actually even just give a nay or yay whether they were interviewed. We don't want the names. We just say, whether they are those who are posted there or interviewed. This is just a yes/no question.
Yeah, for us, we don't I'm not authorized to release parts of an investigation or the steps that were or were not taken.
Okay. That leads on to my next question, which might be similar, but then it's a different case. So again, when in 2015, you were asked to look into a rumor pertaining misconduct by General Vance during his time in Gate Town. And then again, same question, will all the officers posted there interviewed?
So I don't believe we were actually, I'm just looking at my notes here. The CFNIS, I don't believe, was asked to look at that specific allegation.
Okay, so you weren't even given the task to do so. Now, my next question is, the media has reported that the minister has directed that the investigation into the Navy Red Room incident be reopened. Is that correct? And how did you receive this direction?
Thanks for the question, Madam Chair. I'm aware of the Red Room and the unit disciplinary investigation. I think it's probably a good point to advise that investigation was conducted by the Navy. The stuff that I'm aware of is probably the same as you from the media. So nothing's been referred to my unit for investigation at this time.
So, well, again, is the relation between you and the ombudsman. Can the ombudsman direct you to conduct an investigation?
To be clear, nobody outside of the Provost Marshal can direct me to conduct an investigation. Folks can report an allegation to us, and then we'll decide whether or not we proceed with an investigation or not.
My next question is, as the commander of Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, you are a lieutenant colonel. How does that affect your ability to investigate allegations against colonels, generals, and admirals?
No, it's a good question. It's one that has been asked from time to time. For us, the unit itself, you see me in a uniform today. My investigators and myself, from day to day, we don't wear a uniform. There is no threat of promotion or through threat to promotion or postings or anything from the work that they do, because the folks that we're investigating really have no control over that. That's internal. Everything that we do is protected from influence in that it's all steered through the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. We work directly for the Provost Marshal and not for the chain of command.
That's pretty good to know. Okay, so now I'd like to ask the Ombudsman, Mr. Lake, a couple of questions. I might have heard it before, but I might not hear it.
I'm sorry,
clearly.
Alice, you're out of time.
Okay.
Now we're going to go, I believe, to Ms.
Thank you.
Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses joining us today. My first questions are for Colonel LeBlanc. In your answers, I want you to focus on women and generally on survivors. Can you discuss why it is important for your investigations to remain neutral and independent?
Absolutely. So there's always a balance, right? So the institution wants to, even through best efforts, wants to support victims, but at times, victims may not want that. They may not want their unit or folks that they're working with to understand it until, a public court appearance. So as a part of what we're doing to make sure that it's known is following the spirit of the Victim Bill of Rights, even though it doesn't apply to defense. And then in doing so, being ready to follow the same spirit for Bill C-77 when it comes into force. So my unit specifically over the last 2 years has been working towards civilianizing our victim service delivery program. So bringing in civilians where we can demand a certain level of training and deliver and assign them on a certain level of training to be able to deliver that forward. On top of that, we've also added an additional victim services program manager that will be hired in the coming months. That person will work with and seek some secondment training through the SMRC and through, in Ontario, the VWAP program, which is the Provincial Court System Victim Services program, so that we can really leverage the best of what's out there and move towards achieving greater standards of services.
Thank you. And how do you ensure that the process is trauma-informed approach and encourage members to come forward?
That's a good question, Madam Chair. There's two parts, I guess. So public discourse, like what's happening right now, is very important, because I can tell you there's certainly an increase in folks coming forward to the CFNIS right now. To me, although the public discourse focuses on the problem areas specific to the CFNIS, I can say that it's truly good to see that folks have the confidence in us and are coming forward. In terms of trauma-informed approach, so when we host our basic indoctrination course for new investigators, we bring them in for about a week every year. We deliver training there. Sometimes it's internal. This year we brought in Dr. Haskell to deliver the trauma-informed approach, and as well as the one of the provincial police colleges to bridge the theoretical to the practical. But we also every year send folks on a training with the U.S. Criminal Investigation Division, which is a U.S. Army military police civilianized force, to accept the FEDI interview training, as well which is a forensic experiential trauma-informed interviewing, which is a different way and a different tool in their toolbox when dealing with victims of complex and heinous crimes.
Thank you, Colonel. Madam Chair, I would like Ms. Vanderbilt to finish the question she was going to ask before. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to finish my last question for Mr. Lick, which, as we know now, having gone to the minister, we've even heard from Stephen Harper's chief of staff that the only appropriate thing for the minister to do is go to PCO, which then has the whole of government. They can then see where it should go next. Would you have, if PCO contacts you, and especially on something as serious as the chief of defense staff, would you have then gone back to the victim and said that PCO did want an investigation, and see if you could get the permission?
That is generally the approach we take with any complaint coming forward. Yeah. We will inform them of what can be done. If we then go forward with their permission to proceed with a particular way of doing things, we would always come back to them to tell them what was the approach provided, or what happened, and then they can make an informed decision about how to go forward.
So presumably that may have occurred, and if the person then says no, especially if it's something like an email, no, I don't want to, then would there have been anything more PCO could have done at that point, given that there was no permission? I mean, we know we have to make it better for victims and safer for them to come forward, but without having that permission, without having that information, could PCO even have investigated further at that point?
That's a question that you would have to ask PCO. That's not a question for myself. I can't really comment on their particular process.
Very good. And now we're going to go to Monsieur Barcelot-Duval, 2.5.
Mr. Barcelot-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. My question will be for Mr. LeBlanc. One of my colleagues asked, as Lieutenant Colonel, investigating somebody who is higher ranked than you, what does that create as a situation? Perhaps we could take this a bit further. I'd like to know whether in your department, let's say if you decide to investigate a general, or I don't know, the chief of defense staff, what happens concretely? To what extent do you have the power of saying, okay, we're coming into your office, we're taking the documents, you must answer questions? Can there be any hindrances to the work you do, and is there anything that you would not be able to overcome in order to do the work?
Thank you for the question. So I guess there's a few parts to answer here. So one is the unique position that the CFNIS is in. So under the Queen's regulations and orders, which is how we operate, and the National Defense Act, there's certain folks that are authorized to pursue charges. As we are both criminal and service offense charges, the CFNIS is the only institution that can pursue both. So we can investigate under the criminal code, but also under the Code of Service Discipline, where a unit level can only look at one or the other. as it applies to general officers, and my unit has quite a few investigations that we've done in the past and present on general officers. They don't fall within our chain of command as it relates to policing. So there's really no fear of reprisal. There's no, other than advising the provost marshal that we have a complaint. As far as it relates to how you investigate, that doesn't change. We're still gathering the evidence, comparing it against whatever service offense or criminal offense is there, and seeing if it meets the elements and seeking legal advice as required along the way. So that really doesn't change.
Ça répond bien à ma question. Au moment de la nomination du général.
That answered my questions. When General Vance was appointed, there had already been allegations and rumors about him. Your department was supposed to lead an inquiry, but it would seem that it wasn't conclusive. What would have made this investigation conclusive?
Very sorry. Now we're going to Ms. Matheson, 2.5 minutes as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to pick up from where I got cut off before, in terms of that toxic culture, how do you start to really get at it? It is so pervasive. I mean, I've even heard that it's beyond, it's not just about sexual harassment, it's about harassment in general, where women are asked, are punished in a harder fashion with physical punishment. They have to do more exercises than their male counterparts. And also, how do you deal with a toxic culture when it's within the organization that is supposed to be independent itself, like the military police?
Well, for us, again, we go back to just the reasons that we're here. So whenever we receive a report that where we're talking about abuse of authority, I suspect we're talking about a lot of things, bigger picture, but specifically as it relates to us, it's really receiving the report and following the evidence as it leads us. And determining whether or not it supports a charge. In terms of the overall Canadian Armed Forces, I would defer to the Chief of Defence Staff, who has spoken, I believe, on this issue. In terms of institutional change, that's really beyond the scope of what I do. We really just focus on the criminal and service offences.
And maybe Mr. Lick, you can also address this too. But if you are the ones in charge of that trust, of that institutional change, but you yourself are within it. So how are we supposed to move that change? What are the answers here that you see? Is it again through that education? And I asked the CDS, but it has to be more than a half an hour every year or 1 week per year. It has to be constant.
So that's a very broad question, and I think there are two, for me, in my role as ombudsman with my team, there are 2 points here that I'd like to make. One is that there is a lot of internal change within the armed forces that needs to go on through training, education, everything like that needs to go on and continue to go on and improve, maybe do it differently. That is what they need to do. But the other part of it is that people who in the end suffer a situation such as misconduct, sexual misconduct, need to have the confidence to come forward and know that their allegations will be addressed without reprisal, without any career repercussions. And ultimately, given the command and control structure of the military, something like that needs to be external to the department, to the military, in order for people to have comfort level to come forward. That is ultimately what we owe those victims.
And that's your time. Ms. Alislev, take us to the end of our time.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to ask Colonel LeBlanc, the Red Room Navy investigation, you have not been engaged in. It's a Navy investigation, so therefore it is not an independent investigation. Is that correct?
I can't speak to the independence, yes or no, of the investigation because I'm not the one conducting.
Thank you. You also stated in your testimony earlier that no one can direct an investigation except the Provost Marshal. So the Chief of the Defense Staff, the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff, the Minister, none of them can direct an investigation be conducted?
folks can come to our unit. I mean, there is a section within the NDA that allows the VCDS to issue an instruction, but I've yet to see it happen on my side.
Very good. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the time. I want to really thank the witnesses. This was excellent testimony, and I appreciate you coming and the work that you do in your service. So we're going to suspend momentarily while we do the sound check for the next panel. Marie Deschamps, who is the former Justice for the Supreme Court of Canada. And Ms. Deschamps, you will have 5 minutes for your remarks, and then we'll go into our rounds of questions. You may begin.
Merci. Alors, je vous remercie beaucoup de
Thank you very much for this invitation. As you know, I have great respect for your committee's work. I took inspiration from this when I drafted my report. In previous appearances before the Senate Committee on Defense or before the Commons Defense Committee, I focused mainly on the responsibilities that I believe the Victim Support Center should have had. I am referring specifically to the authority to receive reports or complaints, and whether these are confidential or not. I emphasize the necessity of accompanying victims throughout the process, including the process through which there is sanction of the alleged perpetrator. I talked about the expertise that the center should have to be able to help the armed forces in training programs. And I, above all, emphasize the importance to have a center acting as a central point for data collection, because we will never know what happens with sexual assault or sexual harassment if we don't have data. But what I'd like to discuss today with you is something else.
And that on which I have never insisted. The first is leadership. So it is a very well-known management rule that without personal engagement of the senior leadership, there will be no change of culture. And I made that point in my report. And I read the first sentence of my section 4.4.2, which I titled Proactive Leadership. And I will read the first sentence. In order to bring about cultural change in an organization and to reduce the occurrence of sexual harassment and sexual assault, it is essential that senior leaders, and particularly those with general oversight responsibilities, become directly engaged in cultural reform. C'est la fin de ma citation. So as soon as August 2015, the then Chief of Defense Staff issued an operation order in which he stated that he would establish a global strategy and an action plan for responding to sexual misconduct. I thought that my message had been heard. But it took more than 5 years before we got to see this global strategy. I already made some comments on this strategy. Amongst other comments, I said that I thought that it lacked concrete measures. Apparently, this is in the action plan, but the action plan, I understand, is not public. So I want to repeat here that without strong engagement from the senior leaders, the armed force culture will not change. The years that passed only made it more difficult to restore the trust in the leadership. And I can only hope that the new leaders will have understood the situation and will rise to the challenge. So that's my point on leadership. My second point concerns the lack of clarity of the policies and procedures on intimate relationship that I understand was mentioned by the current acting Chief of the Defense Staff. So on that issue, I refer to section 6.2 of my report, where I expressed the view that the policies needed to be clarified to address more explicitly the power imbalance, including by creating a presumption, an administrative presumption, that where the relationship is not properly disclosed, the relationship should be considered to be an adverse personal relationship. To my knowledge, the policy on personal relationship, and that's the AOD 1519-1, has not been changed. Le texte de cette politique est source de confusion.
The text of that policy is confusing because of the organizational structure of the armed forces. There is an inherent risk of abuse of power. My recommendation regarding the presumption of harmful relationship is intended to deal with this. As you may note, there seems to have been a lack of will to change in 2015. I hope that the message is now clear. On this note, I'm available to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Alislav then for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And first and foremost, thank you so much, Madam Deschamps, for all the work you've done for many years. We would truly be lost without your research and perspective. So thank you very much. I wonder if I could just start for a moment in terms of the legal aspects around the Minister of National Defense. Is it your opinion that he has the authority and the responsibility to ensure that good order and discipline and that all conduct rules are enforced and that investigations occurred and that results are reported back and offenders are held accountable?
I'm sorry, but I'm hesitant to give any legal opinion in this forum. And obviously the minister is the head of the organization, but I think that
even if we're not looking at a legal opinion,
well, your question is a legal question, and it calls for a legal opinion. And I was told that I was here to comment on my report, and I'm drawn to other fora. So I'm sorry, I prefer not to. I leave it to others. And in the previous committee I participated in, there were number of witnesses who were willing to give their legal opinion on that. And I prefer not to engage in this, just as I have
And
fended
thank
off
you.
all media requests because
And
this
thank you,
all
thank
leads
you.
to
It
this
was
kind of
only
question.
because you talk about the critical need for senior leaders to
Yes.
engage. And I think Canadians would say that the minister is the most senior of senior leaders. And if no one is accountable to ensure that this culture change occurs, then we feel somewhat adrift that we'll ever be able to achieve culture change. But I respect. So in terms of senior leaderships, do we not only need them to get engaged, but do we not also need to ensure that they are without fault? Because they won't have credibility to change the culture if they themselves have been complicit in this behavior in the past. Do you see that as a stumbling block in terms of the culture change in the military?
Senior leaders must be role models in the commercial environment. I'm sure that you know that many organizations have as a rule that there can be absolutely no intimate relationship with staff, never mind their rank. And many CEOs have lost their jobs over this kind of issue. And it's still my view that senior leaders must act as role models.
And if not, if they haven't been, then perhaps we need to look at doing something to ensure that the senior leaders that we have are. Is that what you're suggesting?
Our role model, we need to ensure that we have good leaders that can act as role models.
So in terms of the lack of clarity on intimate relationships, and why it's hard to understand why, when you clearly outline that this aspect of the code of discipline needs to be clarified, and that I'm understanding that it's a source of confusion, but it also could perhaps be a source of abuse. I'm wondering if you could explain why that is so important. That I asked a previous witness that how would you know if something is consensual or not when it's a senior leader and a junior, particularly in such a hierarchical, strong organization like the military?
Personal relationships are very difficult to address in all kinds of settings. And in a large organization of 100,000 people, it's where people live together, many people are single. It's very difficult to impose a complete ban. So there must be limits posed in order to protect those who may be vulnerable. And this is why I indicated that to me, the way I solved or I thought an avenue for solving this issue was to start with the premise that the relationship can be abusive. So a presumption of prejudicial prejudicial personal relationship. That's in their jargon that they call adverse relationship. But the way it was solved, it was through disclosure.
Yeah. So I don't have much time. But would it be possible, in your opinion, to have a complete ban of intimate relationships for, let's say, the general officer rank, because they are held to a much higher standard, and that might just be a consequence of being a general?
Intimate relationship, it depends, because if the person, I don't want to contemplate every single situation, but if the two persons are single, if they are willing, if the relationship is disclosed, that's why I stayed away from complete ban, because these persons have their life to live. So a complete ban, I'm very afraid of them. So this is why I didn't go there.
Very good. Now we're going to go to Ms. Dillon for 6 minutes and a little bit extra.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Maître Deschamps.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Deschamps, I'm very happy to see you here, and I've followed your career with great interest over the years, and thank you for participating in our committee hearing today to deal with this subject of such great importance. So my first question, in your report, you say that hundreds of people collaborated with this on this review. Could you tell the committee what the major concerns were of the members of the Canadian Forces which may have led them to break their silence? Very briefly, please. Well, I talk about this in my report. Several. Well, the biggest issue was the fear of reprisals. And the fear of reprisals is not just coming from the chain of command, but also the fear of reprisal comes from the unit itself, because in a given unit, that's considered as being a small family. So if there's a complaint against another member of the unit, the other members of the unit, I think the expression that I used was, the bandwagon. So they could circle the wagons as a protective screen for the perpetrator. And then the victim ends up excluded from the group, rejected from the group. So it's not just the chain of command, it also comes from the unit. And that's why work has to be done at every level. Thank you. Next question. The majority of people who wanted to join the army do this with a wish to serve their country. Despite all of the horror stories and reports, women should not hesitate or give up on this dream. If this is what they are dreaming of, how can we encourage more women to join the Canadian Armed Forces in a feeling of safety and security? How can we enable this? Well, that's a very general question, and it is the main question. It is essential that women are be part of the Canadian Armed Forces and be full-fledged members of society. The armed forces need women at every level. In my report, I suggested that to attract women, women have to feel that they have a future, because very often women consider that they are limited. I've spoken to women who knew that they would be blocked at the major level, that they wouldn't go beyond major. There were practically no models. There have to be models. There have to be examples to show that there is a future, that there is a career progress that's possible. So there have to be role models in the Army. And I see it as a positive sign that there will finally be women appointed to command positions. But the responsibility is not just with the senior leadership. The responsibility also lies with non-commissioned officers. I can't remember how you say that in French. Because these people have to be able to assist women in growing in their work. They have to be able to give them responsibilities. Think of women when they're delegating. So responsibility is at every level to ensure that women will feel that they have a place in the Army. Could you tell us a little bit about intersectionality? For example, if a woman is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, is she more exposed to harassment given this minority status? Have you seen this during your investigation? I received few testimonies from the LGBTQ community in the course of my review. However, this may be less well known. I acted as an evaluator in the class action suit of the LGBT purge for 2 years, and that mandate is now over. I did note that there is a disproportionate number of women from that community who are the subject of truly disastrous treatment. In your report, you said that there is a toxic culture, a sexualized culture. I wonder, in a milieu where bravery, courage, integrity, protection, and safekeeping are so essential, how can people actually behave this way and create such a toxic atmosphere? What is it that leads to such an environment? Were you able to identify this in the course of your work? Could you explain to us a little bit more about this or share your opinions with us? Thank you. I did discuss this in my report. There's nothing mysterious about this reaction. It's an attitude that we find in many male milieus, many hierarchies. I looked at work that was done in other environments of security organizations, but also mining, for example, areas where there are not many women. There is a masculine culture in which it is highly sexualized. In my report, there are rules now to remove calendars with pictures of nude women on them. These are minor things, but they can sexualize an atmosphere. For example, inappropriate touching. I'm sorry.
Now we're going to move to Madame Larouche, 6 minutes.
Madame Larouche, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Judge Deschamps, for being with us this morning. I'd like to join my colleagues who've recognized all of the work that you've done in this area to denounce these cases of sexual assault. We have all been traumatized by the article that came out by Noémie Mercier and Lee Castonguay in 2015 after your inquiry. They are the ones who talked about this first. Yes, but they also talked about you. They talked about you in the article, in any case, what I found. So you were essentially, in the same time there was your investigation, there was the article who raised this issue and highlighted it. So they were at the origin of it. And so I would like to say bravo to them and to you. It was a very important and interesting article. I'd like to hear what you have to say now, because this morning we saw in the newspaper, we learned that the honor operation that was implemented to combat sexual misconduct in the Army has been shelved. Could you tell us what this means to you? When this was announced, did the Chief of Defense Staff intend to end Operation Honor? What does this mean to you? Was this a failed program, inefficient, or was this an attempt to kind of shut things up? First of all, the name Operation Honor was highly discredited. I'm not going to repeat here the caricature that was done with that name. But if you go back to 2015, when the Army's action plan or the project was first disclosed, the first stage of this was to formulate a strategy to change the culture. And as I said, it took 5 years to obtain a text for that strategy. But if you refer to the 2015 project, which was called Operation Honor, in that first phase, the idea was a strategy, which is now called the road to dignity and respect, the path to dignity and respect. I think that the armed forces wish to continue with the stages that they had put to paper at the time, and that stage one, which was supposed to be called culture change strategy, is where they're at 5 years later. And now there is a text, and it's been given a name. I am deducing, that's my personal interpretation, I'm concluding that they wish to distance themselves from the name Operation Honor because it led to caricatures. So it was the name at the end. Okay, I'd like to know, in your report, you recommended the creation of an independent organization responsible for reporting of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Forces. And during the appearance at the House Defense Committee, the Minister of National Defense said that the government was going to implement an independent reporting structure to examine allegations of sexual misconduct. How can an independent examination organization improve the reporting and dealing of with misconduct in the Canadian Forces? And how can an independent organization guarantee that the needs of people who are experiencing misconduct, sexual misconduct in the armed forces, are dealt with? Well, there are two elements. I talked about, first of all, I didn't have the jurisdiction to talk about the justice system, as you know. This was not part of my mandate. But you have to distinguish clearly. There's an organization in which somebody can make a complaint, and then there's the organization that does the investigation. I conceived of an independent center as being the center to deal with the victims and take care of the victims. I was not thinking that center, but that was my personal opinion. It was an idea, but I haven't seen I hadn't gone through the details of it. But this independent center would be in charge of the legal process. I don't think it should be confused with the victim support center, because that center should be totally independent. And you must know that in 1998, they gave military justice the responsibility of dealing with sexual misconduct, but previously that was common courts. So this Center for Investigation and Legal Proceedings should be totally separate from the Victim Support Center. Where complaints of sexual assault could be dealt with. Now, if we don't want to go back to the civil justice system, there should be an organization that's independent. But I think that I'm worried that we're simply going to see a multiplication of organizations.
Go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madame Deschamps. Everyone has said how incredibly important your work is, and I certainly agree with that. And yet, despite the incredible work that you did do, here we are today. And despite that report, despite Auditor General's reports, despite the work of the Status of Women Committee in 2019. I feel like we're a bit stalled, that we're not getting to what we need to, and I think that you alluded to that as well. After you created the report, what follow-up occurred with the Canadian Armed Forces?
I remain in contact with Dr. Preston, who heads the center, and I tried to maintain the communication with her because I wanted to ensure that if she had any question, she had someone to turn to. And I also maintained contact with the Chief of Defense, the Defense Staff, and with the DM. However, I was not asked to do any follow-up on the implementation of the recommendations. Some kind of follow-up was made by the Auditor General. It may be time now that someone acts as a watchdog more closely.
Okay. So despite the fact that you are considered such a huge authority on this, you haven't been in more of a formal, these sound like kind of informal conversations that you're having. You have relationships, you're always there for support, but it's not something that's formalized. Do you think that would be something that should move forward with? Would you recommend that? I mean, putting yourself obviously at the center of it, but
I'm sure you know that I'm not looking for a job. But I can give as an example that they in Australia, they had made such kind of huge review. And this was conducted by the head of the Human Rights Commission in Australia, Elizabeth Broderick, who did a superb job. And then there was a follow-up with Mrs. Broderick 2 years after, because there were issue with the equivalent of their military college, of Ori Military College, and she did another complete review. So I think, yes, when something is put in place, there has to be someone who looks after the shoulder to make sure that things are really happening.
Yeah, because only a few of the recommendations have actually been implemented to some degree. So that full implementation is still necessary. Now, the government has said as well that they are trying to create a new body, an independent body. Have you been contacted all about that? Because in the previous testimony, the ombudsman specifically said that he had not. Have you?
There were very discreet, informal contact, but I have nothing. Nothing is on the record so far, and as I mentioned, I'm.
Okay.
I don't think I'm the one who should do the job. I voiced my concern. I voiced my recommendation. I think it's someone else needs to make sure that things are happening. Things may have evolved, and someone may have to have a fresh eye on it, but someone should look after it.
Okay. One of the things that the ombudsman also talked about just before was, again, he focused on that independence, that necessity, and even within his own office, the fact of reporting directly to the Minister of Defense clearly was a problem. He talked about the ability, like many other commissioners, to report to Parliament and changing that legislation. Do you think that that would be a welcome step forward?
The defense ombudsman has very, very little power.
So providing that direct access to Parliament would help with that situation, in your opinion?
I'm not commenting on to whom the ombudsman should report, but certainly the way this function is structured is not very helpful.
Okay. And again, we come back to, I think, the difference. I'm trying to determine the difference between held authority and leadership, or that responsibility, and the fact that even though, authority can be used as a weapon, clearly, in so many instances, and women within the armed forces have seen that. So in terms of moving forward with that leadership and seeing that as very different, I've heard stories about, and again, we kind of get, I guess, more to the general toxic culture of how things move. And it's not even just within sexual misconduct. It's there are punishments. We've heard about punishments on just from a physical punishment standpoint, where women are trying, they're almost trying to break women to stop them from advancing. Can you talk about that? But I also, because I know I have limited time, I'll squeeze it in. We could talk about the women that are being brought forward. The minister constantly talks about a pipeline for women to be advanced into leadership roles, which is very, very important. But I had asked the acting chief of defense staff, and I'll ask you the importance of ensuring what kind of supports are around those women in that role of leadership, because throughout their careers, they are constantly there are attempts to be broken. It's harder for them. Their authority is questioned more. So how do we support those women? How do we change that?
Unfortunately, you're out of time again. You have to make your questions more succinct, but we will go to Ms. Shin for 5 minutes in the second round.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Madame Deschamps, for appearing today and for your report. It's so refreshing, and you speak my language. As you know, Bill C-3 was passed in Parliament because we see a need to counter culture and systems that victimize women and promote toxic masculinity. And your report is important, and our discussions today are important to help bring this cultural shift within the Canadian Armed Forces, but I believe it will also, as it gets resolved, trigger change in other sectors of society. The other day when I was questioning the minister because I felt he wasn't getting the big picture, I pointed out that the purpose of processes and systems exists not for themselves, but to help us bring justice and not hinder it. And processes and systems are there to ideally provide an environment that safeguards and maximizes the potential for accountability, integrity, and safety to draw out truth and an outcome of justice. But if the top authorities and leaders like the Minister of Defense, who in my opinion is acting in a way, making decisions that are questionable, negligent, or insensitive to reality, is there a process where those who are in more junior positions can file an appeal against those in higher authority about their decisions?
I'm not sure what kind of process you're referring to because depending, I can give you a very technical response, which is there is, yes, an administrative process that goes up to the Chief of Defense Staff if you go all the way to the top. And there is also a arbitration mechanism. So I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I'm the most in the best position to describe what is currently the process and whether you're talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault. If it's sexual assault, it's the military justice system. If it's sexual harassment, it's the administrative system that I described goes up to the top. So yes, there is. The short answer is yes, there are mechanisms.
Okay, so there are those processes. Now, are they used? Is there pushback? What is the culture there and how these tools are used, whether it's for harassment or assault? When the appeals are being made.
For assault, it's the military justice system. For harassment, I've seen different approaches. I've seen in some environments. I have an example in mind in the Navy where the very, very highly ranked officer was taking it very seriously, was receiving every day, every report, and wanted to make sure that the victims were looked after, that the perpetrators were not left alone. But in other instances, I've seen pure denials. So it's a very large family, and consistency would be advisable.
Yes. So what would happen then if the defense minister is at the top and you want to appeal to like the top voices or the chief of staff? Is there a process for that to happen as well?
I'm not sure that the minister is part of the administrative process. I think it stops at the CDS.
So the problem I'm seeing here and why we're here is that, again, I'm referring to systems when they're blind to the plight of people and the nuances that are human sensitive, such as gut instincts and unofficial knowledge of background. And when leaders or those in position to impact justice ignore, per se, say an elephant in the room, then a culture can't shift. And you mentioned a lot about strong leadership. And strong leadership shouldn't blame the system, but you take action that transcends the system because they put the dignity and well-being of people first. And I, along with many who have observed abdication of responsibility with our current defense minister, we wouldn't really be here having these long discussions if there was complete confidence. Would Madame Deschamps be able to comment if the minister could demonstrate more convincing commitment to shift the culture of toxic masculinity in the way he's handling all this, that he is providing leadership that transcends the system?
I'm not sure whether you're asking me to give my opinion on the way the minister is currently acting, which I don't want to comment on. But
I'm
certainly,
sorry, that's your time anyway, so you're off the hook. And on to Ms. Hutchings for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And Madam Deschamps, I'm going to echo everything my colleagues have said, and I hope you realize what a model you are for young women and girls. It's truly remarkable what you've done and how much we appreciate your appearance here today, your expertise, and you're able to emphasize the transformational recommendations to protect all women and everyone, all members of the CAF. And your report is so interesting, Madam Deschamps. You talk about in your 2015 report, you talk about the culture at the CAF, and you talk about highlighting that both men and women appear to be generally desensitized to the sexualized culture, and that officers often tend to excuse the incidents of inappropriate contact on the basis that the CAF is just a reflection of Sicilian society. God, isn't that sad? Since 2015, our government has taken steps to improve the conditions of Canadians who serve, but it's so clear that more can be done. What will it take, Madame, to create that multi-level cultural change?
well, this is the answer that the global strategy was supposed to bring. And when I drafted my report, I said that the Canadian forces needed to create this or to come up with a global strategy. I was not in a position to draft this strategy. I thought that they would come up with it, early. This is not what I have seen. It's difficult for me today to give you like clips because this is not something that can be done overnight. When I presented my report to the generals, I told them that it would take a generation to accomplish the change. However, we're 6 years after that presentation. The generation is growing up, and we have not. It seems that we have accomplished very little. So,
okay. Thank you, Madam. My colleagues and I have often highlighted the importance of having a survivor-centric lens on this committee study into sexual misconduct in the CAF. How can we ensure that the needs of the survivors are always respected in every single step of the investigation process for sexual misconduct?
One of the idea I came up with, and it is not something that I just took out of my head. I had an example from one of the contributors who acted as an advocate. So one very concrete means I had to comfort the victim was that the center was supposed to be created, the independent center had staff where they would have an advocate who could welcome, take care of the survivor the minute they would put their foot in the center and stay with them until the very end, could accompany them to the hearings, could contribute to the preparation of their testimony, could ask the police or the crown attorney, the military crown attorney, where the case was at, so that the victim, the survivor, had someone that he or she could call at every minute to ensure that the case was proceeding and that her issues were taken care of.
Thank you, Madame. That's wonderful, wonderful advice. Madame Deschamps, going forward, you just alluded to it was in your report. You said, it's going to take a generation of change, a few generations of change. So going forward, what would your first steps be to get this process going? What would your advice be?
Very concretely, we need to have better training, and we need to have men understand that they need to include the women.
That was so well said, Madame. Thank you so much for your leadership, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Very good. Madame Larouche, 2.5 minutes.
Madame Larouche, you have 2.5 minutes. Yes, thank you. Madame Deschamps, I'd like to continue about how complaints are dealt with, because Gary Wamber, the former ombudsman, talked about a semi-independent hybrid mechanism that would look good on paper but wouldn't have necessary independence. Do you share that pessimism of Mr. Walburn's? I didn't hear what Mr. Walburn said, but I believe that this organization should be independent. I don't think that a hybrid would work at that stage that we are at currently. I don't think it would inspire enough confidence and trust. But, you know, there are all kinds of difficulties that this comes with, because members are on bases and then they travel, they move around. So that does involve all kinds of difficulties. Yes, there are certain difficulties, but still, as you mentioned, the importance of having something independent is there. I'd like to know what you think the factors are which could explain why there are still 7 of the 10 recommendations in your report that have not yet been fully implemented by the Canadian Armed Forces. After all these years, how come there's still so much that remains to be done? I have no answer for that. After 2 years, I criticized the armed forces, and initially I was told that all recommendations had been implemented. And when I looked into their little table, I explained that no, that wasn't actually the case. I have no explanation for it. Thank you. So again, with a view to finding solutions to what's happening, what additional steps should be implemented to reduce or eliminate sexual misconduct in the Army? You talked about you had recommendations and they haven't yet been implemented. Perhaps there have been other, you've had other reflections afterwards. Would you have any other measures or recommendations to make? Well, as I said, there could be somebody with a fresher look, new blood, to examine the current state of affairs. But as I was outside the system for 6 years, I cannot make concrete recommendations to you beyond.
Going to Ms. Matheson for the final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to use my 2.5 minutes to have hopefully Madame Deschamps answer the question I had. It was around that authority, that ensuring that the women placed in the authority have the supports that they needed, and what levels of, I mean, I know that there are education programs now, but are they sufficient? And if you had recommendations around that.
So I don't have, as I mentioned, I don't have any further recommendations because I don't know what's going on right now. It's been 6 years now. And I know that there is, for example, the advocate that I just mentioned exists, but this function doesn't hold a parcel, is only a tiny portion of what I designed. So if they can just start with putting in place my recommendation, that would be a start. There may be more to do. I don't know. I've not been there.
I've actually heard that often the education portion is extremely limited, and while it may happen every year, it's extremely short. It's not maybe taken as seriously. Did you see ways that could be enhanced? Maybe not the direct education or like specific steps, but that focus on the education piece?
Canadian Armed Forces have been very good at tackling other issues. For example, they tackled, not completely, but they did a lot of work with alcohol consumption, but it took a lot of effort. So if they can just gather their efforts to do the same kind of control that they are doing on alcohol consumption, they were subsidizing it, they stopped doing it, it was open bar very often, they stopped doing that. So they put limits, so they could think of measures. They did that. In the matter of mental illness, they have more programs on this. So if they can just use the tools that they already have in place for other issues, that would be a good start.
So we just have to find the will to do that.
Very good. And now we do have a little bit of committee business. So I want to thank Madame Deschamps for excellent testimony today. Thank you so much for being with the committee. Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we discussed, it's a will of multiple members of our committee to proceed with the brief discussion of our committee business. Members have busy schedule in their constituencies, and I'm worried about the clerk and the interpretation staff working on over 28 committees. Madam Chair, for the purpose and clarity, I have a motion that it will be sent to all members P9 in both official languages. So the motion I move that regarding the committee's study of sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces, each party be invited to submit their priority ranked witnesses to the clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, March 31st, and these witnesses be invited by the clerk based on the schedule of the committee.
Very good. Since that's a dilatory motion, there is no debate on that motion. Clerk, I would invite you to take the vote.
Madam Chair, as point of order, so there's no, I just want to clarify, Madam Chair.
Yes, my understanding is that when there is a motion like that, that's a dilatory motion. It's not subject to any discussion. It just goes to an immediate vote.
Ms. Dillon. Point of order. Can we clarify with the clerk it's a dilatory motion?
Yes. Clerk, if you have an opinion, now's a good time.
In my opinion, it is not a dilatory motion.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm to the will of the committee then. If there's discussion about the motion, I'll hear it. Ms. Saeed.
Yes, I agree with my colleague, Ms. Sidhu, because next week we have the constituency week, and I think it will not be appropriate to take time out of the constituency week. I know it is an important study, so we can have the list of the witnesses to be submitted by next week and then schedule from those witnesses, because list of witnesses always is intended to make sure that if we don't have like one witness, we can go to the next one. So if all the parties can submit the list of the witnesses next week, and then we can schedule once we come back after the constituency week. I think it will not be fair to us in our fulfilling our responsibilities as member of parliaments towards our constituents, and also for the interpreters and the analysts who have been working so hard adopting to new norms, doing it virtually. So I think let's be fair to everyone and have the meeting after the constituency weeks.
Yes, and if we can settle this point today, then I will certainly be willing to cancel the scheduled Tuesday meeting. Ms. Matheson.
So I think that they're more just points of clarification. I just want to make sure. So one of the reasons why the motion, we wanted to ensure that all witnesses were heard before was because previously that was not the will of the committee. And so we wanted to reinforce the will of the committee that specific witnesses were heard. I understand some witnesses aren't available at specific times, and so supplementing that is all right. That was always available to every member of the committee. But I want to make sure that we understand that those witnesses need to be in place as much as possible. I would also like to know and make sure that once we submit one list of witnesses, from my point of view, I wanted to hear specifically from all of the witnesses that were on that list, see if there were holes, as we've determined in other studies, sometimes holes can happen, where the testimony exists. And then be able to add. So if I have to, and I'm quite happy to bring forward witnesses by March 31st, but will I have an opportunity to do that again if I feel that there still are things that need to be heard from others, and we can do the research, work with the analysts who are incredible and the clerk who is incredible to ensure that we fill those holes. I want to make sure that that's not going to be limited for this as well.
Yes, and it's always the will of the committee to add additional meetings and additional witnesses to studies as they go through them. And I would just clarify that on the list of witnesses specified in the motion, several of those cannot appear before April 13th. They're not available, and that was the issue that we had. Ms. Alislav.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to then make an amendment to this motion where it says the clerk, based on the schedule of the committee, is where it ends. Add with 2 meetings the week of April, I think it's 6th to 9th, if I've got that right. So this motion as it stands says that we would have witnesses by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, March 31st, which sounds perfect, and that these witnesses be invited by the clerk based on the schedule of the committee. Perfect. And then my amendment, including 2 meetings the second break week of April 5th to 9th.
Very good. I will hear discussion then on the amendment. Seeing no discussion on, Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Chair. So the discussion was that not to have the meetings in the break week. That's what we were discussing. And I think, again, like based on the amendment which has been proposed by Ms. Alislav, is looking for 2 meetings in the break week. This is exactly the point we were discussing before, and like submitting the list of the witnesses to make sure that appropriate time is provided to the MPs to fulfill their duties as members of parliament and be responsible to the constituents and not meeting there. So I think we should meet and have meetings in the weeks when the House is sitting, and that will be week of April 12th.
Ms. Hutchings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd just like to echo what my colleague, Ms. Zahid, said. You know, with this additional week is a constituency week. It's a shorter week because it's the Easter weekend. Also, I just want to reiterate the analysts. It's an Easter break with them as well. But also, we've heard often in every committee, we hear it in the House, the stress that all the interpretation is putting on the interpreters. I think we need to consider all that as well. And I think we need to, you know, let the clerk have time to get the witnesses in place for that following week.
Ms. Alislav.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very important topic. And yes, we absolutely have responsibilities to our constituents, but as members of Parliament, we have responsibilities to the men and women in uniform to do our very best as quickly as possible at a moment in time where, as the acting chief of the defense staff says, the military is in a crisis, and this is an inflection point. And Canadians, as well as men and women in uniform, are looking to us to do the work for the country as much as the work for our constituents. So this amendment is a compromise. 1 break week exclusively for our constituents, another break week where we take 2 opportunities to have meetings to speak on and investigate further on such an important topic. And I know that our colleagues from the other angle of this study on Defense Committee are meeting both break weeks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we were discussing, you know, there's no difference between next week and the week after. It's a constituency week. We also have obligations towards our constituents. We also have obligations towards our staff to not overwork them. We have only 3 weeks until Parliament goes for a full run for the next 7 weeks. I think it's not okay to stress out our staffers to overwork them. Just because we have Zoom doesn't mean we can or we should abuse it and end up abusing our staffers, the interpreters, the clerks. I think everybody is in need of a break. Everybody needs to be able to just take these moments for themselves. Yes, we have duties towards our Canadian Armed Forces, but we have duties towards their constituents. We have duties towards the mental health of other people who surround us and who support us all the time. I think we have to really take that into consideration, the mental health of those who are supporting us. And it starts to become that, because we had already during constituency week meetings and pre-meetings. So I think this, just because Zoom exists doesn't mean we should abuse of it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Saheed.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I agree with Ms. Dillon. I think we have 2 constituency weeks, and after that we are here for 5 weeks. Over 100,000 people in my riding are looking in this difficult time trying to get through this COVID-19. I have a lot of scheduled meetings with them, with the stakeholders, businesses, like with the lockdowns and all, like businesses are facing a lot of issues. So I think it is really very important that we complete that work in the next 2 weeks. And then I know it is an important study, and we come back to this on April 12th. In these difficult times, as we are all trying to navigate through COVID-19, the numbers are on an increase. In Ontario, like we have seen a big sharp increase. I think there are a lot of assignments for us to make sure that we are there for our constituents also. And I think it will not be fair to the legislative staff here, like the clerk, the interpreters, trying to run the committees during the Easter week.
Very good. Then we will vote the amendment, which is to have 2 meetings the week of April 6th. And Madame Larouche, d'avoir 2 réunions dans la deuxième semaine de...
Madame Larouche, to have 2 meetings in the second week of the break.
The vote.
Ms. Dillon.
Are we voting to the amendment right now? Okay, so
yes.
No.
Ms. Hutchings.
No to the amendment.
Monsieur Serret.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
No to the amendment.
Ms. Zaid.
No to the amendment.
Ms. Alislav.
Yes.
Ms. Shin.
Yes.
Ms. Wong.
Yes.
Madame Larouche.
J'aurais voulu proposer peut-être un amendement, mais pour le...
Well, I might have wanted to propose an amendment, but for the time being, I'm going to abstain.
Ms. Matheson. Ms. Matheson.
Sorry, yes.
Five nays, 4 yeas.
So the amendment is defeated. Then we will vote on the motion. Madame Larouche, did you have a point?
Excusez-moi,
Sorry, I was talking about the conversation about recognizing the work and what additional work this might involve. We were talking about 2 meetings in the following week for the clerk and the employees of the House. Since this was split, I understand that the motion was to add 2 meetings in the second week. Could we perhaps then suggest at least have 1, maybe for the Thursday of that week? I'm looking for the date. In other words, a compromise between 0 meetings for the next 2 weeks and 2 meetings that seem to be too much for the Liberals. Maybe just 1 meeting on the Thursday. I'll look for the actual date. I'm looking on my calendar. Could actually somebody give me the date? It's
Because we are voting on the motion.
OK, alors moi, je peux pas.
So I can't propose a new motion to meet just once on the Thursday, which is the 8th?
Not until we finish voting this motion.
OK.
Okay.
Ms. Matheson.
Sorry. I was like, where's my button? So Madame LaRouche could not propose another amendment to the motion?
No, because we started the voting.
Oh, sorry.
So the clerk will take the vote on the motion.
Ms. Dillon,
Yes.
Ms. Hutchins,
Yes.
Monsieur Sarré,
Oui.
Ms. Sidhu,
Yes.
Ms. Zaid,
Oui.
Ms. Alislav,
Yes.
Ms. Shin,
Yes.
Ms. Wong,
Yes.
Madame Larouche,
Oui.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
yeas 10.
Very good. So we will call for the witnesses by the Wednesday and let the clerk put them in order. Madame LaRouche.
Oui. Mais exactement.
So if we have a list of witnesses for the 30th, I understand the Liberals' argument that we want to have time for the ridings. Maybe 2 was a lot of meetings. I'm sensitive to what all the things that we have to do. But the compromise could be to give the team time, give committee the time to take the witnesses that we'll send by the 31st and then have a meeting to get ahead, because we do have a lot of work to do and that could be on the 8th of April.
Very good. That is the new motion on the table. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, then I would have the clerk take the vote.
Ms. Dillon,
No.
Ms. Hutchins,
No.
Monsieur Sarré, Monsieur Sarré,
No. No.
Ms. Sidhu,
No.
Ms. Zaid,
No.
Ms. Alislav,
Yes.
Ms. Shin,
Yes.
Ms. Wong,
Yes.
Madame Larouche,
Oui.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
nays 5, yeas 5.
And I will also vote yes. And so we will have one meeting that week of April the 6th. I leave it to the clerk to organize whatever is best. And if you could have your witnesses in then by next Wednesday. Thank you to everyone for staying a few minutes, and I will cancel that committee business meeting that was originally for next Tuesday. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Very good. Then have a wonderful break week and a half, and I will see you then. Adjourned.